The chandelier above me gleams like a guillotine blade, and everyone in this room has already decided I am guilty. My name is Betty Harper, and I am standing in the middle of a trap disguised as a party. My mother's smile is pinned to her face. My father counts the exits, and somewhere near the balcony, a railing has been loosened just for me. They think I am the helpless daughter who will take the fall for their crimes to save their reputation, but they forgot that even a scapegoat can learn to bite back. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. I'm standing under a chandelier that costs more than my car, and everyone in this room has already decided I'm guilty. I can feel the judgment pressing against my skin like humidity. My mother Lydia is 20 feet away, her smile pinned to her face like a vintage brooch, expensive, sharp, and immovable. My father Thomas isn't smiling. He's standing near the heavy oak doors, scanning the exits like he's counting witnesses rather than guests. And then there's my brother Evan, the golden boy, the reason we're all here tonight. He's laughing into a crystal champagne flute, his arm draped around Sloane, celebrating his engagement like our family isn't rotting from the inside out. To the local senator shaking his hand, Evan looks like the future. To me, he looks like the most expensive investment my parents ever made. I sip my tonic water, keeping my back to the wall. I've learned that in this family you never leave your blind spots exposed. The venue is breathtaking, a historic waterfront estate that smells of old money and salt water, but the air inside is stale with tension. That's when I notice something small and wrong. Over by the terrace doors, tucked behind a heavy velvet drape, there's a maintenance ladder. It shouldn't be there. This is a black tie event. The staff here are ghosts, invisible and silent. A ladder in plain sight is a mistake this venue wouldn't make. Then I see the man standing near it. He's not wearing the crisp white jacket of the catering staff or the black suit of the venue security. He's wearing a gray windbreaker that looks cheap against the marble walls. He's watching the balcony railing outside, not the guests. My mother's eyes flick toward him just for a second, then snap back to me. It's a look I know. It's the look she gives a conductor before the curtain rises. To understand why I'm terrified at an engagement party, you have to understand who I am, and more importantly, who I'm not. My name is Betty Harper. I am not a tragic figure, and I am not a damsel. I am a compliance auditor for a mid-sized logistics firm. My life is built on spreadsheets, regulatory codes, and the boring, honorable bedrock of verifiable facts. I drive a sedan with 120,000 miles on it. I pay my student loans on the first of the month, and I have never asked my parents for a dime since I left their house at 18. I built my independence brick by brick because I learned very early that in the Harper household, love was a currency and the exchange rate was extortionate. Evan got the praise because he was the asset. I got the be grateful speeches because I was the overhead. My core wound isn't some dramatic abuse. It's the quiet, grinding realization that I was only tolerated as long as I was useful. My mother is a social climber who treats family portraits like marketing materials. My father is a man who believes cruelty is just a form of practicality. And Evan, he's not evil, he's just weak. He's the product of a lifetime of being shielded from consequences. Tonight is his launch party. Marrying Sloane means merging the Harper name with old industrial wealth. It's the merger my father has been salivating over for a decade, and I am the loose thread that threatens to unravel the whole tapestry. The thread started pulling 3 weeks ago. It wasn't a dramatic confession, it was a clerical error. I received a tax document in the mail, a 1099 DIV form from a brokerage firm I didn't bank with. It was addressed to me, but it should have gone to my parents' accountant. It detailed the taxable income on a trust fund established by my late grandmother. The trust I was supposed to gain full control of when I turned 25 3 years ago. According to the document, the account was active. According to my parents, that money had been lost in the market during the recession. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I did what I do for a living. I audited them. I called the brokerage. I verified my identity. I requested transaction histories. The money hadn't been lost. It had been systematically drained. Withdrawals labeled education that matched Evan's private school tuition. Withdrawals labeled maintenance that coincided with the renovation of my parents' summer house. And recently, a massive liquidation that looked suspiciously like the down payment for this very venue and the custom ring on Sloane's finger. They had stolen nearly $400,000 from me, forged my signature on the beneficiary waivers, and used my social security number to cover the tax liability. I confronted them 2 weeks before the party. I sat them down in their pristine living room and laid the papers on the coffee table. I expected guilt. I expected panic. Instead, my father picked up the documents, glanced at them, and set them back down with a sigh, as if I were a child who had brought him a drawing he didn't ask for. "We manage the family resources, Betty," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Evan needed the support to secure this union. This marriage lifts all of us." "You're being incredibly selfish." "It's theft," I said, my voice shaking. "It's fraud. I want it back, or I'm going to a lawyer." My mother had laughed then, a cold, sharp sound. "You'd sue your own family right before your brother's wedding. You'd destroy him for money you didn't earn. Who do you think people will believe, us, or the daughter who's always been unstable?" That was the threat. They didn't fear the law. They feared the scandal. They needed to neutralize me before I could file a formal complaint. And then came the invitation, the sudden pivot to warmth. "Come to the party," my mother had said on the phone, her voice dripping with fake honey. "We want you there. We can discuss a repayment plan after the wedding. Just don't ruin this for Evan. Come celebrate. Let's be a family." I knew it was a lie, but I came because I needed to see Evan. I needed to see if he knew, and I needed to show them I wasn't afraid. I thought I was walking into a negotiation. I didn't realize I was walking into a trap. The stakes tonight are absolute. This party isn't just a celebration, it's a transaction. Sloane's father is on the board of 3 major banks. The guests here are the jury of public opinion in our town. If my parents can discredit me here in front of these people, my legal battle becomes a joke. They need a narrative that paints me as jealous, erratic, and unreliable. I watch the room, and the setup is becoming painfully obvious. The accident pieces are being moved into place. Earlier, I heard the event coordinator arguing with my father in the hallway. She was saying something about the balcony railing on the east terrace being original to the house and needing reinforcement. But my father waved her off, saying they wanted the ocean view for the toasts. Then there was the security situation. I overheard a waiter complaining that they were short-staffed because the agency canceled last minute, leaving only a skeleton crew and that man in the gray windbreaker. I watch my father cross the room and lean in to whisper to the gray windbreaker man. The man nods and slips a small tool. It looks like a hex key into his pocket before vanishing onto the terrace. My stomach turns over. They aren't just going to humiliate me. They are engineering a disaster. A few minutes later, the music lowers. My mother taps a microphone. "If everyone could please move toward the east terrace," she announces, her voice projecting tailored warmth. "We want to do the family portraits with the sunset behind us. It's such a beautiful evening." The crowd begins to migrate, a herd of silk and tuxedo wool moving toward the balcony. The same balcony with the original railing. The same balcony where the man with the tool just went. I spot a caterer, a young woman looking frazzled, carrying a tray of empty glasses. "Hey," I ask quietly, "is the east terrace usually open? I thought it was closed for repairs." She blinks at me, surprised to be addressed. "It was marked off earlier, but Mr. Harper told the manager to remove the caution tape, said it was fine." My blood runs cold. They aren't trying to hurt me, not physically, I don't think. They are too calculated for that. They are setting a stage. They need something to happen, something dramatic and destructive, and they need me to be the one holding the match. I look across the room and lock eyes with Evan. He smiles a genuine vacant smile and waves me over. He has no idea. He's standing on a trapdoor his parents built, and they are handing me the rope. I have a choice. I could leave. I could walk out the front door, get in my car, and drive straight to the police station. But I have no proof yet, just a tax form and a bad feeling. If I leave now, they spin the story that I boycotted my brother's engagement, proving how petty and jealous I am. They win the narrative. If I stay, I'm walking into whatever nightmare they've scripted. I take a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I decide I will endure one night. I will stand in the photo. I will smile. And tomorrow I will burn their world down with subpoenas. I walk toward the terrace, stepping into the cool evening air. The view is spectacular, a sheer drop to the jagged rocks and crashing waves below. The guests are crowding near the doors, leaving the edge clear for the family. My mother arranges us. Evan Sloane in the middle, Thomas on the left, Betty. She pauses, her eyes hard. You take the end, right by the railing. The light is better there. She points to the spot where the gray man had been standing. The railing looks solid, but as I step toward it, I realize my mistake. I thought this was a family event where I was the black sheep. It's not. This is a courtroom rehearsal, and they have already written the verdict. The air on the terrace feels thinner than inside, charged with a static that makes the hair on my arms stand up. I try to steady my breathing, focusing on the rhythmic crash of the waves far below, but the silence of the people around me is deafening. I can feel the trap tightening, not in grand gestures but in micro behaviors that only a survivor of this family would notice. My mother isn't just organizing a photo, she is stage managing a crime scene. She moves guests around like chess pieces, ensuring clear lines of sight for some and blocked views for others. My father isn't watching the camera, he's watching my hands, watching my drink, watching me with a predator's patience. Even Sloane's parents, the wealthy industrialists, are staring at me with a mixture of confusion and distaste, as if they've been briefed that I am a liability they need to insure themselves against. I try to ground myself. I catch the eye of the bartender through the open glass doors, the same guy I tipped earlier. He gives me a small, tired nod, a tiny anchor of reality in a sea of gaslighting. I hold on to that nod. I am real. I am sane. I am here. Betty, shift a little more to the right, darling. My mother calls out, her voice pitching up into that brittle public-facing register she uses for charity galas. You're blocking the sunset. Just lean back against the railing. Relax. You look so tense. I step to the right. The spot feels isolated. Evan and Sloane are center stage, glowing in the golden hour light. I am the dark footnote at the margin. I place a hand on the iron railing. It feels cold and damp with sea spray. It looks solid, thick black iron set into the stone floor, but as I lean my weight against it, a sudden sickening vibration travels up my arm. It happens in a heartbeat. Everyone smile, the photographer shouts. I shift my weight to adjust my pose. There is a sound like a gunshot, a sharp metallic crack that echoes off the stone facade. The section of railing behind me doesn't just bend, it detaches. It shears away from the stone as if the bolts were made of clay. Gravity lurches. I stumble backward, my heel catching on the hem of my dress, flailing for a grip on empty air. I don't fall. My hand snags the strap of Sloane's heavy silk gown, and I scramble forward, landing hard on my knees on the stone pavers. But the railing is gone, and standing right next to where I had been leaning in for a better angle was Mr. Henderson, the biggest donor to my father's nonprofit board. He wasn't as lucky. There is a terrible wet thud as he hits the lower terrace tier 12 feet down. Then silence. Absolute vacuum-sealed silence. Then the screaming starts. Oh my God, he fell. Someone call 911. Don't move him. I am frozen on my knees, scraping the skin off my palms as I try to push myself up. My heart is hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I look over the edge. Henderson is groaning, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood pooling dark on the white limestone below. He's alive, but the damage is catastrophic. I turn back to the family, expecting shock. I find performance. My mother's hands fly to her mouth. She doesn't look at Henderson. She looks at me. Her eyes are wide, filled with a horrific manufactured sorrow. Betty, she whispers loud enough for the stunned circle of guests to hear. Betty, what did you do? The narrative snaps shut around me instantly. A groomsman, a college friend of Evan's, who's been drinking since noon, steps forward pointing a shaking finger. I saw her, he stammers. She was messing with that railing before the photo. She was shaking it. I thought she was just, I don't know, angry. I didn't touch it. I scrambled to my feet, backing away. It just gave way. It was loose. It was fine this morning, my father says, his voice deep and grave, stepping between me and the guests like a warden. We had the inspection yesterday. Betty, please, don't make this worse. He isn't yelling. That's the genius of it. If he were yelling, I could fight back, but he's speaking to me like I'm a dangerous, confused child. The guests retreat, forming a wide perimeter. I see Sloane's mother pull Sloane away from me, clutching her daughter's arm as if I'm contagious. The police arrive within 10 minutes, blue lights flashing against the stately columns of the venue. The paramedics swarm the lower terrace. The atmosphere shifts from social panic to legal jeopardy. I am isolated near the buffet tables, watched by a private security guard my father employs. An officer approaches a young guy who looks overwhelmed by the wealth in the room. He starts taking statements. I watch my father talking to the police sergeant, gesturing vaguely in my direction, shaking his head with a look of heavy resignation. The venue manager is there too, sweating, desperate to shift liability. I hear him say, "Tampering and unauthorized access." The sergeant walks over to me. "Ma'am, I need you to empty your bag." My bag. I clutch my clutch purse. Why, I didn't do anything. Just procedure, ma'am. We have reports of property damage leading to injury. My father steps up beside the officer. Betty, just show him. Cooperate. If you cooperate, we can handle this quietly. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely undo the clasp. I dump the contents onto the white tablecloth. Lipstick, phone, keys, wallet, and a multi-tool. A heavy silver folding tool with a hex key extended. I stare at it. The room spins. "That's not mine," I whisper. "I've never seen that before." "It fell out of her bag," the officer says to his partner, bagging it immediately. "I didn't put that there." I look at Evan, who is standing 10 feet away, pale and shell-shocked. "Evan, tell them I don't carry tools. Someone put this in here." Evan looks at me. For a second, I see the brother I grew up with, the boy I protected from bullies on the playground. But then he looks at Sloane, who is weeping into her father's shoulder. He looks at the ruin of his engagement party. He looks at the future he's about to inherit. The weakness wins. He looks down at his shoes. I don't know what she carries, officer. She's been really upset lately. About money." The betrayal hits me harder than the pavement would have. "There's more," the sergeant says. He's holding my phone. "We need to take this as evidence, but we noticed the screen was active. A text message sent 20 minutes ago." He turns the screen toward me. It's a message to an unsaved number. I'm going to ruin their perfect night. Watch me. "I didn't write that," I say, my voice rising, bordering on hysterical. "My phone was charging. Mom took it to charge it in the bridal suite because the battery was low." "Betty," my mother sobs from the sidelines. "Stop lying. Please, we can get you help. Just stop lying. They have everything. The motive, money, the opportunity, the groomsman's testimony, the weapon, the tool, and the confession, the text. It is a masterpiece of framing." My father steers me into a small side office used by the event staff. The door clicks shut, muffling the chaos outside. It's just me, him, and the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling, who has materialized out of nowhere. "The police are going to arrest you for reckless endangerment and assault," my father says flatly. The sorrow is gone. His face is cold, hard granite. "Sloane's family is already talking about a lawsuit. Henderson's family will want blood. You are looking at prison time, Betty. Real time. You planted the tool," I say, hate burning the tears out of my eyes. "You rigged the railing." "You are unstable," he counters smoothly. "You have a history of financial erraticism. We have the records of your confusion regarding the trust." He slides a piece of paper across the desk. However, the family is willing to protect you. We can claim this was a mental health episode. We can send you to a private facility. No charges, no prison. I look at the paper. It's a document titled Voluntary Commitment and Asset Management Waiver. Sign this, Mr. Sterling says softly. It grants your parents power of attorney to handle your legal defense and restitution to the victims. It authorizes them to liquidate your assets to pay for the damages you caused. My assets, the trust fund. This isn't about the accident. I realize my voice low. This is about the audit. You need me to sign away the money you stole so I can never sue you for it. If I sign this, I'm admitting I'm crazy, and I'm giving you permission to finish looting the account to pay for Henderson. If you don't sign it, my father says, leaning in, you walk out of here in handcuffs, you lose your job, you lose your reputation, and Evan will never speak to you again. I look at the paper. It's a life raft made of barbed wire. If I sign, I'm safe, but I'm owned. If I don't, I'm free, but I'm destroyed. I look at the small cut on the back of my hand, a scratch I got when the waiter bumped into me earlier. My father's eyes flick to it. Look at your hand, he says. Injured while loosening the bolts, the police have already noted it. They thought of everything. I stand up. My legs feel like lead, but my head is suddenly terrifically clear. No, I say. My father blinks. Excuse me. I'm not signing it. I grab my purse, snatching it off the table before the lawyer can react. I'm not signing a confession. I'm not signing a waiver. Betty, you walk out that door and you are alone, my father hisses. We will bury you. You already tried, I say. You missed. I open the door and walk out. I don't look at Evan. I don't look at my mother. I walk past the police officer who steps forward to stop me. Am I under arrest right now? I ask, channeling every ounce of paralegal assertiveness I have. Have I been charged? Not yet, but... Then I'm leaving. You have my ID. You know where I live. I push past him and sprint to the parking lot. I get into my beat-up sedan, lock the doors, and my hands shake so hard I drop the keys twice before I can start the ignition. I peel out of the gravel lot, watching the estate shrink in the rearview mirror. I drive for 5 miles until I find a gas station. I pull over, kill the engine, and vomit onto the pavement. I sit there gasping for air, the smell of vomit and sea salt in my nose. I am 1 step away from losing everything. My family has framed me for a crime I didn't commit to cover up a theft they did commit. I have no allies in that house. I pull out my phone. They kept it as evidence. No, I grabbed it back when I took the purse. I check it. The text message is there. Deleted, no sent. I dial a number. Not a friend, not a crying shoulder. I call Sarah, a woman I worked with at the nonprofit 3 years ago. She's a disbarred lawyer turned investigative journalist who hates rich people almost as much as she hates injustice. Betty. She answers, her voice rough with sleep. It's midnight. What's wrong? I need you to meet me. I say, my voice frighteningly steady. My parents just tried to frame me for attempted murder to cover up a $500,000 embezzlement. I need to know how to document a crime scene from the outside. I hang up. I wipe my mouth. I look at my face in the rearview mirror. The scared daughter is gone. She stayed on the balcony. The woman in the car is an auditor. And I'm going to balance the books. I spent the night on Sarah's pull-out couch, surrounded by a fortress of paper. Sarah, my former colleague and the only person I trusted to help me dismantle my own lineage, sat across from me with a laptop and a pot of black coffee. She didn't offer me pity. She offered me strategy. You don't need to scream, she told me at 2:00 a.m. You need to audit. The law doesn't care about your feelings, Betty. It cares about documentation. If they want to frame you, they had to create a paper trail. We just have to find it before they delete it. We worked through the night, fueled by adrenaline and the terrified clarity that comes when you realize your life is on the line. I started with the money. Accessing the trust records was easy. I had the account numbers from the 1099 form. I logged into the portal, reset the password using my own social security number, and downloaded 10 years of history. It wasn't just theft. It was systematic pillaging. I found the education withdrawals, 50 grand a year, wired directly to Evan's prep school. I found the medical expenses that matched the dates of my mother's plastic surgeries. And then the smoking gun for the motive, a transfer initiated 3 days ago. The remaining balance of the trust, nearly $200,000, had been moved to a holding account controlled by my father labeled Settlement Reserve. They knew the audit was coming. They were hiding the assets before I could freeze them. But the money only proved motive. It didn't prove innocence. For that, I needed the accident. At 4:00 a.m. I got lucky. I found the venue coordinator's personal email on a vendor list I'd photographed during the party, pure habit from my compliance days. I sent a blind email, subject line, liability shield. I wrote, "I know about the railing. The police are looking at me, but when they subpoena the maintenance logs, they're going to look at you. If you have proof you warned the Harpers, send it now or you go down with them." It was a bluff. A desperate, terrified bluff. At 6:15 a.m., the reply came. It was a forwarded email chain from 2 weeks ago between the venue manager and my father. Subject: East Terrace concerns. Body: Mr. Harper, as discussed, the ironwork on the east balcony is flagged for repair. We cannot allow guests on that section. Reply from Thomas Harper. We need the view. Remove the caution tape. We will sign a liability waiver. Just make sure the security cameras in that sector are under maintenance during the event so we don't have ugly equipment in the shots. They had disabled the cameras. That was why there was no footage of the accident. But the email proved they knew the danger. It proved premeditation. We need one more thing, Sarah said, her eyes scanning a background check she'd run on my father's associates. The guy in the windbreaker, the security guard you saw with the tool. She spun the laptop around. Is this him? It was a mugshot from 10 years ago, assault, named Gary Polson. That's him, I said. He's not security, Sarah said grimly. He's a contractor your dad uses for his rental properties. And look at this. She pulled up a credit card statement, my parents' joint account, which I was still an authorized user on for emergencies. Yesterday afternoon, Home Depot. Purchase 1 hex key set, 1 industrial solvent. Charge to the Harper Family LLC. The picture was complete. They loosened the bolts. They planted the tool on me. They coached the witnesses. They deleted the footage. So what do we do? I asked, staring at the evidence that turned my parents into monsters. Go to the police. If we go to the police now, your dad's lawyers will bury this in motions for years, Sarah said. They'll claim the email is fake, the tool was yours. We need to break them. We need to do it in public where they can't buy their way out. The farewell brunch, I said. It's at the hotel at 10:00 a.m. Sloane's parents are hosting. Perfect, Sarah said. She handed me a flash drive. I'll call the detective I know in fraud. You go to the brunch. Keep them talking until we get there. I walked into the hotel ballroom at 10:15 a.m. I wasn't wearing the ruined dress from last night. I was wearing my work suit, charcoal gray, sharp, professional. I looked like an auditor coming to close a file. The room went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. My mother was mid-laugh at the head table holding a mimosa. When she saw me, her face drained of color, then hardened into a mask of tragic concern. Betty, she stood up, her voice trembling theatrically. Oh, honey, we were so worried. Did you turn yourself in? Sloane's mother stood up, looking furious. Someone call security. She shouldn't be here. I'm not here to stay, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. I didn't shout. I spoke with the flat, devastating cadence of a woman reading a verdict. I'm just here to return some property. I walked to the head table. Evan was staring at me, looking sick. My father stood up, his napkin clenched in his fist. Betty, this is enough, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. You are making a scene. You are mentally unwell. We have the papers ready for you to sign. I bet you do, I said. I pulled a folder from my bag and dropped it onto the table. It landed between the orange juice and the flower arrangement. But I brought some papers, too. Security, my father barked, looking toward the doors. They aren't coming, I said. But the police are. They're about 5 minutes out, so let's chat. I opened the folder. Exhibit A, I said, sliding the email printout toward Sloane's father. The venue management warned Thomas Harper 2 weeks ago that the railing was unsafe. Thomas Harper ordered the caution tape removed and the cameras disabled. He signed a waiver accepting full liability for any injury. He knew someone would fall. Sloane's father picked up the paper. His hands started to shake. Thomas, is this true? It's a forgery, my father snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. She typed that up. She's delusional. Exhibit B. I continued, ignoring him. I slid the credit card statement toward Evan. Yesterday at 2:00 p.m., Dad's corporate card was used to buy a hex key set, the same type of tool found in my bag. The purchase was made by Gary Polzin. You remember Gary, Evan? He fixed the roof on the lake house. He was the man in the windbreaker standing by the railing before the collapse. Evan looked at the paper. He looked at the charge. He looked at his father. Dad, you said Gary was in Florida. He is, my father yelled. Betty is lying. She's trying to ruin your wedding because she's jealous of your success. And finally, I said, dropping the heavy stack of trust fund transfers in the center of the table, the motive. You didn't frame me because I'm crazy. You framed me because I audited you. I looked at Sloane. Ask them where the money for your engagement ring came from, Sloane. Ask them who paid for the deposit on this ballroom. I pointed to the highlighted lines. Stolen from the Betty Harper Trust. Unauthorized withdrawal. Forgery of beneficiary signature. Sloane picked up the document. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the ring on her finger as if it were burning her skin. Lydia, Sloane's mother asked, her voice icy. Did you steal this money? It's family money. My mother shrieked, the mask finally cracking. The poise shattered, revealing the desperate, grasping woman underneath. It's all the same pot. We raised her, we fed her. We are the reason she exists. She owes us everything. I don't owe you my freedom, I said. She's sick. My father lunged for the papers, trying to tear them up. Don't listen to her. She tampered with the railing. We have witnesses. No, a voice said. We all turned. It was Evan. He was standing up, holding the credit card statement. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, he wasn't looking through me. He was seeing me. I saw Gary, Evan whispered. I saw him yesterday, near the terrace. I didn't think anything of it because I trusted you. He turned to our father. You told me the trust fund was gone because of the market. You told me you paid for my tuition out of your savings. We did it for you, my mother cried, grabbing Evan's hand. He ripped it away. We did it so you could have this life, so you could marry Sloane. You did it so you could hide behind him, I said. The doors to the ballroom burst open. Detectives walked in, real ones this time, followed by Sarah. The room erupted into chaos. Sloane's mother was pulling Sloane away from the table. Guests were recording on their phones. My father looked at the police, then at the papers, then at me. For a second he tried to compose his face, tried to find that reasonable man persona that had worked for him his entire life. He straightened his tie. Officers, thank goodness you're here. My daughter is having a breakdown. She's threatening us. The lead detective didn't smile. He didn't look charmed. He walked right past me and stopped in front of my father. Thomas Harper, he asked. Yes, and I demand you remove this. You are under arrest for fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit assault. The detective pulled out cuffs. Mrs. Harper, you too. My mother screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound that had nothing to do with social etiquette. She lunged at me, her nails clawing the air. You ungrateful little bitch! You ruined everything after everything we did for you. 2 officers restrained her. As they dragged my parents out of the ballroom, parading them past the people they had spent a lifetime trying to impress, my father looked back at me. His eyes weren't filled with regret. They were filled with confusion. He genuinely couldn't understand how the world had stopped obeying him. The room was silent again, save for the sound of my mother's distant sobbing. Evan stood alone at the head table. The golden boy shine was gone. He looked small. He looked at Sloane, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. She was already on the phone with her lawyer. He looked at me. "Betty," he choked out. "I didn't know. I swear." "I know you didn't know about the railing, Evan," I said quietly. "But you knew I wasn't crazy. And you let them call me that anyway, because it was easier for you." I turned my back on him. I walked over to Sarah, who was standing by the door with a grim smile. "Did we get it all?" I asked. "We got it all," she said. I looked at my shaking hands. They were empty of tools, empty of waivers, empty of lies. I was bleeding from the inside out. My family was dead to me, and I had never felt lighter. "Let's go," I said. "I have to be at work on Monday." The fallout wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, suffocating collapse of a structure that was already rotten. In the weeks following the arrest, the Harper name didn't just lose its shine, it became radioactive. The local papers, usually so deferential to my father's community leadership, feasted on the story. Prominent donor. Arrested in engagement party scandal. Fraud, forgery, and falling railings. The details were salacious enough to keep the headlines running for a month. The fake maintenance logs, the planted hex key, the raid on the trust fund. But for me, the drama wasn't in the headlines. It was in the endless gray hours spent in deposition rooms with fluorescent lights humming overhead. My parents were arraigned on charges of grand larceny, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit assault and reckless endangerment. They made bail barely by leveraging the equity in the summer house, but their world had shrunk to the size of their defense attorney's conference room. The venue, facing a PR nightmare, sued them immediately for breach of contract and reputational damage. Sloane's family was faster. They didn't just cancel the wedding. They issued a press release stating they were shocked and appalled by the deception, effectively severing ties before the ink on the police reports was dry. They protected their brand with the same ruthlessness my parents had tried to use against me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like the hero in a movie who walks away in slow motion while the villain's lair explodes. I felt exhausted. I felt the profound hollow ache of an orphan who still has parents. The legal process was a grinder. My parents' defense strategy was predictable: deny, delay, and discredit. They tried to paint me as a vindictive daughter who had manipulated the evidence, but the paper trail Sarah and I had unearthed was too thick to burn. The emails were time-stamped, the bank transfers were traced, the Home Depot receipt was the nail in the coffin. My financial resolution wasn't the lottery win people imagine when they hear trust fund. The reality of forensic accounting is brutal. Most of the money was gone spent on Evan's tuition, the country club dues, the down payments, the image. The money they stole from me had been burned to keep the Harper facade warm. My lawyer, a shark of a woman named Alvarez, who specialized in financial abuse, was blunt. "You won't get the cash back, Betty, it's spent, but we can go after the assets." We put a lien on their primary residence. We seized the remaining investments. In the end, I didn't get millions. I recovered about 60% of what was stolen, mostly in the form of a court judgment that would garnish their future income if they ever had any again. I used the initial restitution to pay off my student loans and clear the credit card debt they had racked up in my name. I didn't buy a sports car. I bought my freedom. I fixed my credit score. I established a safety net that no one else had the password to. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was the silence. For 3 weeks, Evan didn't call. I knew he was being deposed. I knew he was likely being pressured by our parents to remember things differently. I prepared myself for the loss of my brother, accepting it as the final cost of the audit. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, he showed up at my apartment. He looked 10 years older. He wasn't wearing the tailored suits he used to live in. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie, looking like the college kid he never really got to be. I didn't invite him in. We stood in the hallway, the smell of damp carpet between us. "I testified today," he said, his voice raspy. The DA asked me about the conversation I heard between Dad and Gary. I told them the truth. I nodded, leaning against my doorframe. Good. Mom is… She's not doing well, he said, shifting his weight. She keeps asking why you're doing this. She thinks you can just stop it, drop the charges. It's out of my hands, Evan. The state is pressing charges. I'm just a witness now. I know, he said. He looked at me, his eyes wet. I lost Sloane. Her dad threatened to sue me if I ever contacted her again. I lost the job her uncle lined up for me. I'm moving into a studio apartment in the city. I have nothing. He waited. In the old dynamic, this was my cue. I was the fixer. I was the one who was supposed to say, "It's okay, I'll help you come in, let me make you dinner." I felt the phantom limb of that habit twitch. I wanted to comfort him. But then I remembered the balcony. I remembered him standing there while the police searched my bag. I remembered him looking at his shoes while our father called me crazy. You don't have nothing, I said gently. You have the truth. It's a lot lighter than what you were carrying before. Can we? He hesitated. Can we start over? Just us. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I loved him. He was my brother. But he was also a man who had watched me drown for years because he liked the view from the boat. Not yet, I said. He flinched. I need time, Evan. A lot of it. You need to figure out who you are when you aren't being the golden boy. And I need to figure out who I am when I'm not cleaning up the mess. I'm sorry, he whispered, for everything. I know, I said. I accept your apology, but I can't accept you back into my life right now. Maybe in a year, maybe 2, but not today. I closed the door. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It would have been easier to scream or to hug him. Closing the door softly with love but with firmness was the act of an adult. It was the boundary that finally turned the lock. A week later, I received a small package in the mail. No return address, but the postmark was from the wealthy suburb where Sloane's parents lived. Inside was a note on heavy cream-colored cardstock. It wasn't an apology. Sloane wasn't the type to apologize to people she considered help. It was a statement. You ruined my life, the note read in elegant cursive. But you saved me from marrying a fraud. My father says the portfolio audit would have been a disaster if we'd merged assets with your family. So thank you. And go to hell. I laughed. It was the most honest thing anyone from that world had ever said to me. I shredded the note. The internal aftermath was less cinematic. I didn't wake up fixed. I woke up with nightmares about falling railings. I went to therapy. I sat in a chair and cried about the mother I wanted, realizing I had to mourn her death, even though Lydia Harper was very much alive and currently out on bail. I had to grieve the fantasy. I had to accept that their love was conditional, and when I stopped meeting the conditions, the love evaporated. But amidst the grief, there was a strange, sturdy feeling growing under my feet. Resilience. I kept going to work. I filed my reports. I laughed with Sarah over bad coffee. I realized that my value wasn't something my parents granted me. It was something I generated. I stopped explaining myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. When extended family members called urging me to forgive and forget because family is everything, I didn't argue. I didn't send them the evidence. I just blocked the numbers. I realized that family isn't a suicide pact. One afternoon I drove past the venue, the estate on the water. It was closed for renovations. The sign out front said under new management. I parked the car and looked at the balcony from the road. It was scaffolding now wrapped in construction mesh. I thought about the girl who stood there in the velvet dress, terrified and alone. I thought about the trap they had built for her. They had underestimated one thing: you can't frame someone who keeps the receipts. I put the car in drive. The road ahead was boring. It was ordinary. There were no chandeliers, no champagne towers, no applause. Just a long stretch of pavement that I paid for myself, leading to a life that finally belonged to me. I am standing in a kitchen that is arguably the size of my parents' walk-in closet, and for the first time in my life, I feel completely safe. There is no crystal chandelier overhead, just a flickering fluorescent ring light I keep meaning to replace. The air doesn't smell of expensive perfume and fear. It smells of coffee grounds and the damp earth of the spider plant on the windowsill. I've managed to keep that plant alive for 6 months, a small green act of defiance against a genetic legacy that seemed determined to wither everything it touched. It is Saturday morning. My phone isn't ringing with demands. My email isn't flagged with urgent threats. The silence in my apartment isn't heavy, it's spacious. I put on my running shoes and head out. My routine is boring and I cherish it. I run past the laundromat, past the bodega where the cat sleeps on the ATM, and end up at a diner called Sal's. It's a place my mother wouldn't be caught dead, and the vinyl seats are cracked, and the menu is laminated and sticky. But when I walk in, the waitress, a 60-year-old woman named Barb with a beehive of gray hair, waves a coffee pot at me. "Morning, Betty," the usual. She doesn't want my vote, my money, or my silence. She just wants to know if I want bacon or sausage. That transaction is honest. It is the most refreshing thing in the world. As I eat my toast, I let my mind drift to where my parents are. They are currently out on bail, confined to a small rental property, while the bank forecloses on the estate. The trial is set for next spring. I hear through the grapevine, mostly from legal notices, that they are miserable. They have lost their friends, their board seats, and their standing. They are trapped in a prison of their own making, forced to live in the obscurity they always despised. I sip my coffee and realize something that stops the cup halfway to my mouth. The hardest part of this entire nightmare wasn't the moment the railing broke. It wasn't the police interrogation. It wasn't even the poverty I faced when I first walked away. The hardest part was the quiet, devastating acceptance of the why. For years I told myself they were just strict or misunderstood or stressed about money. But the truth was simpler and colder. They didn't frame me because they hated me. They framed me because they loved themselves more. They were willing to send their own daughter to prison, to let me be branded a criminal and locked in a cage, rather than admit they had made a bad investment. They would have watched me rot just to keep their names on a donor plaque for one more year. That realization should break me. But strangely, it calcifies me. It turns the grief into concrete. I didn't take revenge. I didn't act out of spite. I just stopped participating in their delusion. I took my life back from people who treated it like a disposable prop. I pay my bill, leaving a tip that I can finally afford, and walk back to my apartment. The mailbox is waiting. For weeks it was a source of panic, legal threats, bills, subpoenas. Today there is a single white envelope from the Department of Justice, addressed to Betty Harper. I carry it upstairs. I sit on my second-hand sofa and slice it open. It's not a check. It's not a love letter. It's a notification of case closure. The investigation into the incident at the Harper estate is officially closed. The charges against me, the ones my father tried to manifest out of thin air, are formally dismissed with prejudice. And attached is a court order confirming the restitution judgment. The remaining assets of the Harper Trust are now solely in my name. It's not enough money to retire on. It's not enough to buy an island. But it is enough to pay off the rest of my student loans. It is enough to put a down payment on a small house with a yard for a dog. It is my money. It is my name cleared of the soot they tried to smear on it. I put the paper down on the coffee table. I don't pop champagne. I don't call anyone to gloat. I just sit back and close my eyes. I inhale deeply, filling my lungs until my chest aches, and then I let it out in a long, slow shudder. It feels like I've been holding my breath since I was 6 years old. It feels like breaking the surface of a dark, freezing lake after being held under for a lifetime. The water is gone. The pressure is gone. My mother used to tell me that I was a supporting character in the family's success story. She treated me like an extra who needed to hit her mark and not bump into the furniture. She wanted me trapped in their narrative, a tragedy about a troubled daughter that ended with them looking like martyrs. I open my eyes and look at the sunlight hitting the floorboards. The script is in the shredder. The director is in handcuffs. And I am sitting in the quiet, boring, beautiful center of my own life. They wanted to write my ending, but I am not a character they get to write anymore. Betty Harper finally took that deep breath, the silence in her small apartment louder and more precious than any applause. If you were shocked by the cold efficiency of this family's betrayal, hit the like button. Let us know in the comments below what you would have done if you found a tool planted in your bag. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the dark side of human nature. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Radiance. We'll see you next time.